It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, a month or so ago, you told us that President Biden's decision to place Vice President Harris in charge of the U.S. Mexican border issues might be one of the most important of his presidency. But as the flow of illegal immigrants grows daily, including, I think we're up to 18,000 children, and we're running out of facilities for this surge, doesn't this sound like a policy nightmare with no end in sight for the Biden administration?
Well, I do think it was and remains an important choice for President Biden, and it's certainly one for Vice President Harris. This is a case, though, where there are no immediate miracles that are going to resolve this problem. And so the vice president is going to have to work at this over a period of months. I would say that on the partisan front, she's going to be pummeled probably pretty consistently, just because people see her as a fairly strong vice president. And that's the sort of thing that seems to happen in Washington these days. From her standpoint, I think that she and her staff need to lay out some benchmarks and hit them. You know, some of the carping was going on this week at the very time she was actually holding a meeting and doing some work consulting with experts. She suggested she has a trip in the works. So it seems to me that there's a process that they're pursuing. Maybe it's not moving as fast as some would like. On this matter, though, the wrong action is perhaps worse than not as much perceived action. I suspect a lot is happening behind the scenes to lay the groundwork for her. I know some of her staff, they're very smart. She certainly, in accepting this role, knows that she has to be visible, while also knowing that this problem is going to persist and be a very stubborn one. You know, George Herbert Walker Bush, when he was vice president, was placed in charge of the Drug Interdiction Task Force. And it's not as though drugs stop flowing into this country. These are very tough problems, but it does provide an opportunity for a vice president to bring together the officials in the government and really focus with a great deal of attention the administration on this problem. And I suspect she's going to do that. Only time will tell, but they have got to set some benchmarks that are achievable so that success can be claimed, or the critics will certainly have their day with this.
Al, is that your opinion? It seems like the flow is not going to end anytime soon.
Look, the situation at the southern border is a nightmare for every normal administration, unlike the Trump administration, which got pleasure out of it and thought political advantage, even though not right. It's as Craig indicated with Vice President Bush getting the drug problem. This is exactly the kind of problem that presidents like to give to their vice presidents. Politically, unless you're President Trump and your policy is to purposely punish immigrant families and children, and you get some sort of sadistic pleasure out of that, it's just an almost impossible problem for every president. It's a humanitarian problem. But it's also a bonanza for the cable TV networks. It's very easy for them to get a camera down there and find some 5-year-old being thrown over a wall and how horrible that is. And these are really horrible things. And it's also a sort of a sweet dream for the opposition party. You didn't see Republicans at the border, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and all those guys 4 months ago when Trump was punishing people who tried to get into this country. But now they're in the opposition party. They can attack President Biden. And so it is really, the opposition party loves it. And they say, well, one of the reasons more people are coming in is because Biden said we're not going to be an inhumane country anymore, and we're not going to put all the kids in Mexico so they can die in some camps over there. And maybe that's part of the reason that more people are coming, but these things tend to be cyclical. In 2019, with the Trump severe policies, we also had a major surge. To me, this is really about what kind of a country we want to be. And what do you do about it? Many years ago, actually, when Craig was in the White House in 1982, I remember writing a speech for my boss, then Democratic House Caucus Chairman Gillis Long, for the midterm convention. And I wrote this great speech, and I thought it was the most wonderful thing. Gillis added one line, and it was the only thing anybody ever talked about. He said, "Democrats need the compassion to care and the toughness to govern, and nobody ever doubts our compassion." And, this week, Tom Friedman had a piece in the New York Times where he repeated something he first told me over on the Eastern Shore at Aspen Institute at a DLC event in the mid-90s, that he thought the answer to the immigration policy was a tall wall and a big gate. You need a tall wall because you got to make it clear to people they can't just come into this country. We have to have secure borders, but America thrives on immigration. The political problem is that the right doesn't want anybody to come in, and the left wants everybody to come in. And so how do you do that? I think his formula is a good one. And just for one example of why immigration is so important, we're about to enter a new Cold War with China. We're probably in it economically, hopefully not fighting militarily, but militarily as well, and certainly technologically. America's advantage in that Cold War has got to be our brain power. We have 4% of the world's population, but because we have open universities, because of the American dream, and because of our immigration policies, we get much higher percentage of the world's brain power. The kind of people who drive our economy and our innovation, all you have to do is go out to Silicon Valley or Route 128 and up in Massachusetts, and you see that. So this is an incredibly difficult problem. It's a tough political problem, but to me, Craig called for guiding principles, and I think Friedman's are about as good as any.
Al, I want to stay with you. You were kind enough last week to send along to both Craig and I the Cook report that was talking about the redistricting process in Maryland, and in particular, the fate of the first district. And our own John Greep took that information and expanded on that analysis a few days ago on The Spy. What are the takeaways from those stories for you? Is there a real chance that Democratic state leaders, who clearly will still have a final say on Maryland's congressional district maps, would be so motivated to get rid of Andy Harris that they would allow the first district to become purple rather than the lopsided GOP safe seat it is right now?
The short answer is yes. I had the good timing to have been in a briefing yesterday with Dave Wasserman, who does the Cook stuff on redistricting. And he mentioned Maryland. You all can talk more about the Andy Harris politics because you know more about that than I do. But he said Democrats in Maryland could draw a map that had 8 districts that voted for Biden by 15 points or more. Now, he said if the Republicans were drawing it, they have a map that could have 4 districts where Trump won by 5 points or more. Now, the people didn't move. It's just how you draw the lines. If you think nationally, there are only 16 districts out of 435 where the member of the House is from a different party than the person who won the presidential election. There are, I believe, 9 Biden Republicans and 7 Trump Democrats. So that means that if you draw lines that are going to be where your party's candidate wins by 15 points, you're probably going to win all of those districts, except in very extenuating circumstances. So will they do it? My guess is probably. They have or majorities that can override the governor's veto. You may know better than I, Craig may, to what degree Larry Hogan will want to protect Andy Harris. They haven't been exactly great political friends, but my guess is that in Maryland they'll do it. And the Democrats have a margin just 5 in the House. So my guess is any place they can pick up a seat with the historical trends saying that they're going to lose 27 seats next time and lose the House, they're going to do it. And my guess is Maryland will be one of those places.
Craig, what's your take on that?
I always hate to pile on to our congressman out here on the Eastern Shore, Andy Harris. And this is a case probably where people's concerns about him are less important than the old self-preservation that always enters into these redistricting considerations. I mean, the reason Andy Harris is in office and there is this strong Republican district within Maryland is that it strengthened the number of Democrats in all the other districts and thus made re-election for those incumbents or for a Democrat running all the more greater. And so Al has, I think, a better handle on this than I do, but I would say that for any office holder or any Democrat who wants to be an office holder, the calculation for them is, will I be better off or worse off with a more equally distributed Republican population throughout the state? There's no question that computer modeling will provide a more logical plan for congressional districts going forward. More logical meaning kind of geographically drawn lines that make sense. But for every group of Republican voters that you stick into a Democratic district, it makes that incumbent a little more nervous, and that's what makes these things so challenging. We both, Al and I, both lived through and seen what happens in California, and it's a huge battle, but it's a battle because of people's desires, instincts for self-preservation, and that's what they have to overcome. As for Hogan, I think it's not so much a matter that he's enamored with Congressman Harris as it is that he probably would like to have some Republican leadership emerge in the state if his ambitions are national going forward, or even if they're statewide going forward. But I think that it's an uphill climb. If you're going to get additional seats, it opens this whole matter up. Perhaps it'll be a little bit more attractive, but I do think it's going to be a challenge.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks so much. Indeed, we'll see you next week.